So today I'm going to be walking through how I made this reversible Mandalorian and Boba Fett dress. The patterns that I used, which are mix and match patterns, won't be available when this video is live, probably, but they should be available in the next few weeks, and my pattern shop on Etsy will be linked in the description box. Everything I've tried to keep as beginner friendly as possible. This isn't the most detailed tutorial I've ever done, but it should be enough that you should be able to follow it quite easily. So let's get on with the video. So this is the design that I'm going to be aiming for, Mandalorian on one side and Boba Fett on the other. I might make a couple of tweaks to it here and there, potentially in the neckline, but this is the basic thing that I'm aiming for. So these are all the different fabrics that I'm going to be using for this project. This is mainly the Boba Fett side. I'm going to be using the grey or the black, with the Mando side as well. All of this is 4-way stretch jersey, except for this one. This is a 2-way stretch, so I'm going to try and make this work. I don't know if it's going to or not, but we will find out. This is all 95% cotton, 5% elastane, and this is all a mixture from Jelly Fabrics and Little Legs Fabrics, and then this one is from Minerva. I'm also going to be using pins, some fabric scissors to cut out my pattern pieces, fabric pens to draw out my pattern pieces, and some flat braided elastic. This is 5 to 6 millimeters wide. This is optional, but it will give the top a little bit more structure. I'm going to be using my overlocker for pretty much every seam on this project, but you can also use a zigzag stitch on a normal machine if you don't have an overlocker. The other thing that I really recommend with a project like this is some relatively large pieces of paper. This is, I think, A3, and this it just means that you can cut out different shapes from your existing pattern pieces. So this I'm going to use to cut out all the pieces of the top individually. I'm going to be using a few different sets of patterns to make this. So the first one I'm going to be using is the mix and match sleeves pattern. So I'm going to be using the cap sleeve from that. I'm also going to be using my mix and match tops pattern. So from that I'm going to be using the gathered front top. I'm not actually sure if I'm going to gather this or not. It might just be as the standard square neck. And then from the same pack, I'm also going to be using the round neck. This is going to be for the back. And then from my mix and match skirts pack, I'm going to be using my standard skater skirt, and I've cut this to the mini length. This won't actually be pattern piece 6 from that pattern, but I'm just using it from a different one. So I'm going to start with this square neck piece of the top, and I'm going to cut 2 out of this piece of paper just so that I can start to cut out the shapes that I want. So now that I've got 2 of these tops drawn out, I'm essentially just going to draw on this design that I've got on the tops. So I'm going to draw this straight on to here, and then I'm going to cut them out afterwards, which I'll show you in a second. One of the things to be quite careful with when you're doing this is to make sure that the lines somewhat match up. So I've got a line here on Mando, and then I've got a line here on Boba Fett, so they're going to kind of match up, because otherwise you're going to have these seams showing through on this side and it doesn't look great. And then we've got this middle section here is going to be the same as well. And then I do have a couple of extra lines around, but I think I'm just going to put them in with embroidery thread rather than actually cutting them out. So I'm just going to follow the lines that I want to have cut out, and then I'll show you how that looks on each piece. So this is how I've done the Mando side. I'm actually going to fold it in half and cut it out that way to make sure it's even on both sides, but I just thought I would draw it all in so that you can see how I'm going to do it. So any other lines that you can see on the drawing, I'm just going to do them in with embroidery thread. I'm going to cut this out now, and then I'm going to do the Boba Fett one. The reason I want to cut it out first is I want to make sure I can compare as I'm drawing the Boba Fett one, to make sure that I've not got any lines in completely different places that you'll be able to see through the other side. So if I cut it out first, that will be a bit easier. So I'm literally going to fold it in half this way, and then just follow the lines on one of the sides just to make sure that I have everything cut out even. So that's the Mandalorian side all cut out. Now the important thing here is any lines that I've added that weren't already there in the pattern, I need to add a seam allowance. So all along this edge here will need a seam allowance. This edge here will need a seam allowance. Here, 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 and here will need a seam allowance. and then around the hexagon where the cutout is and where the actual hexagon is. So I'm going to leave myself a note on each of those edges, and then I'll show you. You can see I've just wrote to add a seam on each of those lines, because otherwise I quite often forget. So like, you don't need to do that bit if you think you'll remember, but basically when I'm going to cut them out, I'm just going to cut slightly above or below the line that I've got, just to add a little bit of a seam allowance, but I will show you that when I'm cutting them out. Now I'm going to just repeat all that for the Boba Fett side. So this is how the Boba Fett side looks. So basically you can apply this to any character outfit. You just want to draw your design in, and any new lines that you cut, you're going to add a seam allowance to that. So the only other piece that I need to cut is the skirt. So I'm going to do that now. And the skirt is going to be very simple, because I'm just going to be cutting a section at the top that can be kind of like a waistband, like I've got here. I'm going to just do that on the actual pattern, because I am doing the same for both sides, and I will just be able to sellotape it back together. So I'm just going to fold that in half to make sure I can get it even. So I'm literally just going to draw a line at the top here and cut that out. And then again, just going to leave myself that reminder to add the seam allowance. And then when I'm done, I can just sellotape this piece back together, and it will be back to being a normal pattern. So I'm going to start by cutting my pattern pieces out now. I'm going to start with Boba Fett just to show you an example, and then I'm going to go and do the rest off camera, because there is going to be a lot to cut out. So in terms of what I mean by adding the seam, I'm just going to draw in this bottom line, because that doesn't need a seam add in, and neither do these side sections here. But this whole section is a new line that I added, so I'm just going to draw in slightly above that line to add a seam allowance. Hopefully, yeah, you can just about see what I mean there, and that's what I'm going to do for every single place that I've added the seam. So on this one, I'll draw in my side seams regularly, because I haven't cut anything out there, and then this bottom section will need that seam adding in. And then also this middle section needs a seam added in, so I'm going to draw that slightly inside the lines that I've cut. And then this bit is a little bit more tricky, because you only need to add a seam where the straps were. So this is part of the armhole that I haven't altered at all. And then I'm going to come up, add that seam where I need to, and then come back down. The neckline is as it should be. And then again at the other strap, I'm going to come up and add that seam, and then down into the armhole. So I'm going to repeat that for all of my pieces, every one that I needed to add a seam allowance to, and then all the ones that I just need to cut out regularly. And then I will show you, once I've got all of my pieces cut out, what you need in each colour. So this is how Mando's top is looking so far. I've got all my pieces cut out. The sleeve I have cut in half. So this is how it would have started out, and then I've just folded it down the centre and cut it down there. This is the easiest way I've found to do reversible sleeves. So just cut them in half like that, and that will be for the back of the dress. And then for the skirt, I cut them out on a fold, so that when you fold it out, it's twice the size. And then I did the same thing with this waistband kind of area that is also cut out on a fold. So that is all of my pieces for the front of the Mando dress. So I've got the skirt in the silver, I've got this waistband in the kind of grey colour. All of my pieces for the top are in silver as well, including the sleeves, but then my straps are in that kind of grey colour again. So now I'm going to show you the back of this dress. And then this is how the back is going to look. So it's a lot more straightforward. So I just have the silver of the skirt, which again was cut with one of the straight edges up to a fold. So it makes it twice the length. And the same with the waistband, which is in my charcoal grey kind of colour. And then I've just cut a simple shape for the back of the top, which is just my round neck piece. Just cut that out as it is. So this is the front of the Boba Fett side. So I've got the top, all of my pieces in green. And I've got my hexagon there. I've got my two sleeve pieces cut in half. In the yellow, I've got my straps in black. This waistband is this red, and the skirt is black. And again, these two pieces I cut with the straight edge on a fold so that they doubled in size. And then I did forget, I also wanted to add these yellow bits to this skirt as well. So I just cut that out the same way that I did with the top pieces and added that in with the seam allowance as well. And then this is the back of the Boba Fett side. So I have my green for my back piece. I just cut this out of my round neck side of the top. I have my two sleeve pieces in the yellow, my red waistband and my black skirt, and then my two yellow parts on the side. So now I'm going to move on to sew all of these pieces together exactly the way that I've had them laid out on these clips that I've just been showing. So for example, I'm going to take this top piece and with right sides facing together, I'm going to sew this skirt in place so that I can open it out and it will be attached. Some parts will be a lot more difficult than others, especially the front of the tops, because there are quite a few pieces. But I'm just going to aim to have them all sewn together in exactly the way that I've laid them out, just making sure I do it right sides facing together and see how I get on. So this is how the Mando front side looks when it's all sewn together. I did forget about adding pockets, so I did that as well, and I switched this top piece out for a piece without the hexagon cut out because it was just a nightmare to sew. So I'm just going to do that with embroidery thread instead, and I would highly recommend that if you want to make this. And then this is the back of the Mando side. Again, I've added the pockets to this. I've used 8 pockets in total, so I would have needed 4 for the Mando side and 4 for Boba Fett, but I've done them all in the same colours. And then this is the front of the Boba Fett side. Again, I've taken out the piece that had the cutout here, and I'm just going to do that with embroidery, and I've added my pockets. And then this is the back of the Boba Fett side, again with my pockets added on. So now I'm just going to go in with some embroidery thread and add some of these details and go along some of the seams to make them a bit more noticeable. I'm just going to thread up a embroidery needle with probably black thread and do a kind of run-in stitch along there. So this is how the Mando side looks once I've added all of my details. Literally just sewed this on with embroidery thread, and I also added this pendant which I got on Etsy. So I used this spray to hold it in place and then just sewed the top section in place, and it's still kind of sticking there, so it's not just floating around, which is good. And then this is the Boba Fett side, which is obviously a lot more simple than Mando's side, and again I had this pendant from Etsy and I just sewed that on in the same way. So now I can move on to putting the actual dress together. So I'm going to take my 2 front pieces and lay them with right sides facing together. Just match up all of the corresponding edges. And I'm just going to start to pin these 2 together. So I'm going to pin around the neckline, along the bottom edge of this sleeve, and then right along the bottom edge of the skirt. So right along here, along this edge, and then around that neckline. So I've just finished pinning around all of those edges. So around the neckline, down the bottom of the sleeves and then along the bottom edge of the skirt. And now I'm going to go in and sew those in place with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. With the neckline, it might be easier to use a zigzag stitch on a regular machine because you can come down, take up your foot, spin the dress, do the neckline, and then do the same for each corner. Or with an overlocker, what I like to do is I like to literally just pull it straight, and then you can just follow a straight line, and then once you fold it back out, it will be the square neckline that you started with. So now that I've sewn those seams in place, I'm just going to take my flat braided elastic. Like I said, this is completely optional, but I'm just going to lay this right on top of the seam I just sewed around that neckline. It will just add a little bit of extra structure. So I'm just going to take that elastic and lay it right on top of that seam. I'm going to do it on top of the Boba Fett side because whichever side you add it to will be more likely to peek through to the other side. And I think I can probably get away with the black and green peeking through to Mando's side rather than the sparkly silver side poking through to this side. So I'm just going to follow this round and use this finger to guide it. And then once I get to the corner, I'm going to do what I was saying before, where I'm just going to pull that corner to be a straight edge. And then again, with the corner on this end, just pull it into a straight line. And then I'm just going to trim that off and sew it to the end. So that's how that looks once the neckline, bottom of the sleeves and bottom of the skirt are all sewn in place. I've just gone in and repeated that for my back pieces as well. So now I've only got 2 pieces that I need to worry about. So I'm going to take the one that is going to be for the front of my dress and I'm going to turn this to the right side out. And I'm going to take this front piece and I'm going to place it inside the back piece, matching up all of the corresponding edges. So I'm going to keep the back piece inside out and then this piece is going to be the right way out, which means that you will end up with right sides facing together. I'm just going to make sure that Boba Fett is facing Boba Fett here and the same with Mando. I'm just going to start by placing the straps and sleeves inside each other and pinning that in place. And then doing the same for the strap on the other side. So that's both of my sleeves inside each other and pinned in place. And now I'm going to do the same to the sides of the dress. And then I'll show you when that's done. So I've just finished pinning everything in place. So I've pinned down and round the pocket and then along the top of the strap and the sleeve. And I've done that on both sides. Now I'm going to go in and sew all that in place with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. On all of the seams here, I'm going to be sewing through 4 layers of fabric. So that's quite important to make sure that you get all 4 and you don't miss any out. So just straight across the top of the straps and the sleeves, and then down this side of the sleeve, down the side of the top, around this pocket, and then down the side of the skirt at the bottom. So now that I've sewn around all of those edges, I'm just going to unpick a hole in this seam where the dress attaches to the pocket so that I can pull the dress to the right side out. So now that I've made this hole, I'm just going to turn the dress to the right side out. So now I'm just going to go in and check all of those seams that I've just sewn. It can be quite easy to miss something out of one of the seams. I have also just realised I've used a different colour yellow for the front and the back of the sleeves, but hopefully you won't notice that too much. I think my seams are all looking more or less okay. So now I'm just going to close up that hole that I made on the pocket. I'm going to do that with a ladder stitch by hand. So for my ladder stitch, I've got my hole here, and because it was previously sewn together, it kind of folds in on itself, which is what you want. So then I'm just going to do a stitch on the top of the fold on one side, and then over to the other side, trying to keep it as parallel as possible, and do a stitch on that side. And then back over to the grey, and back over to the red. I'm just going to keep doing that with alternating stitches along the length of the hole, and then I'm going to come back so I've got a double stitch and then tie it off at this end. So then once that hole is all stitched up, the dress is done. The only thing that I might do at some point is to add a top stitch around the bottom of the sleeves and along the bottom of the dress. So to do that, I'd just follow along each seam with a zigzag stitch. But for now, this is going to be the final product.